Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and press the like button if this story touches you in any way. I remember the sound before anything else. The creak of the old iron gate at the side of the house, the way it whined each time the wind pushed against it. That sound was a warning, a whisper that the garden beyond was never entirely safe, never truly mine. The garden smelled of damp soil and moss, heavy with the perfume of lilacs in the spring, and yet there was a place, just one corner, where the air seemed different, thicker, as though it carried secrets that no child should breathe in. I was told never to step there. My mother's voice was sharp when she said it, her hands trembling just slightly as she pointed to that patch beneath the walnut tree. "Not there," she warned, her eyes darting away, as if even to look at it too long was dangerous. At first, I obeyed. Children learned quickly what silence surrounds. The rest of the garden was mine. The rows of vegetables, the roses climbing up the wooden fence, the cracked stone path leading to the kitchen door. I learned to climb apple trees, to scrape my knees on the rough bark, to stain my hands with juice as I bit into the fruit before it was ripe. But the walnut tree remained outside my world. I could play near it, but never on that patch of earth. Even the grass seemed thinner there, a faded green that struggled against the shade. It was strange, though, how often I caught my mother's gaze drifting toward it, as though the ground itself held her by an invisible chain. My father, too, avoided it in a way that wasn't natural. He was a man who worked the soil with his bare hands, who dug trenches and planted with precision, who cursed at weeds and fought them with stubborn pride. But never once did he touch the soil beneath that tree. He would circle around it, as though some invisible fence guarded it. And when I asked why, he would say only, "Because it's not for you." Children, though, are curious creatures. The forbidden tempts more than the allowed. At night, lying in my narrow bed with the scent of laundry starch still clinging to my pillow, I would picture that patch of ground. I wondered if treasure was buried there, or bones of animals, or perhaps nothing at all, just superstition passed down like the family recipes. Sometimes I dreamt of digging with my bare hands, of uncovering something shining, something that would change everything. Years later, when the house was no longer filled with laughter or shouting, when silence had become the heaviest sound of all, I did it. I returned to the garden, older, bitter, carrying with me not innocence, but questions that gnawed at me in the dark. My parents were gone by then, both buried in the churchyard with their names carved in stone, leaving me with more riddles than answers. I walked through the iron gate, its creak now softer, weakened by rust, and I stood beneath the walnut tree. The ground looked much the same thin grass, uneven soil, a place that seemed to resist life itself. The air felt colder there, as though the earth had kept its own breath in hiding. I knelt, my fingers trembling, and began to dig. At first, just the surface, peeling away layers of soil, the smell of damp earth rising up like a ghost. Then deeper, my nails caked, my breath ragged, the silence around me growing louder with each scrape. And then, wood. My fingertips struck it first, the rough edge of something man-made, buried deep where no roots dared to spread. I clawed the dirt away, faster now, frantic, until the outline appeared. A box, small, weathered, its lid pressed tight by the weight of years. My heart pounded, the sound echoing in my ears, louder than any church bell. I lifted it free. The box was lighter than I expected, but the air round me grew heavier still. I hesitated, the way my mother had once hesitated, her eyes refusing to meet mine when I asked her why that place was forbidden. I knew, even before I opened it, that what I was about to see would not set me free. The lid groaned when it gave way. Inside lay fragments of cloth, brittle with age, dark stains that the earth had not erased, and beneath them, small bones, delicate, unmistakably human. The breath tore from my lungs, and I dropped the box, the contents spilling into the dirt like a wound opening. For a long moment, I could not move. The garden spun around me, the branches above whispering in a language I did not understand. The earth smelled of iron and rot, though the day was clear and the sun still shone. I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in my throat. It was not a treasure I had unearthed, but a silence so heavy that it pressed against my chest until I could hardly breathe. I sat back on my heels, staring at the bones that had once been hidden so carefully. A child, I thought. A child who had been denied the light of day, whose cries had been swallowed by soil. Questions roared inside me. Whose child? When? Why? But no answer came, only the memory of my mother's eyes, always looking toward this place, always turning away again. I realized then that every family keeps secrets, but some are not stories to whisper behind closed doors. Some are buried, deep and desperate, where the earth itself becomes complicit. I had uncovered mine, though I did not yet know whose blood ran through those fragile bones. And in that moment, I wished I had never dug. Don't forget, if you're still here, listening, let me know in the comments what you think. It means more than you know. I carried the box into the house, though my hands shook so violently I nearly dropped it again. The kitchen smelled as it always had, of wood smoke and dust, though now the air seemed tainted. I placed the bones on the old table where we had once eaten our meals, where my father had carved lines into the wood with his knife, marking years of use. There, in the dim light, I examined what was left of the child. Tiny ribs, a skull no larger than my 2 hands, scraps of cloth that might once have been a dress. The silence was unbearable. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second louder than the last, marking time in a room that suddenly felt like a tomb. I remembered the nights when my parents fought, when doors slammed and voices rose, when my mother would retreat into herself, her face pale, as if she had swallowed a secret too heavy to hold. I remembered my father's anger, the way his fists could shake the very air, though never once did I see him cry. Now I wondered what they had done together or apart. Had this child been theirs? A sibling I never knew, hidden away beneath the walnut tree, while I ran laughing through the rest of the garden? Or was it someone else's shame, buried here to keep the neighbors from ever knowing? The questions burned inside me, but the answers lay silent, just as my parents now lay silent in their graves. Don't forget to like this story if it holds you, because I need to know someone is still with me in this. The weight of it all pressed against me until I could hardly breathe. I wanted to put the bones back, to cover them again with soil and pretend I had never seen them. But I knew that was impossible. The truth, once unearthed, does not go back into the ground. It lingers, it poisons, it demands to be spoken. So I sat there, in the fading light of the kitchen, and let the memories come. The garden, my mother's trembling hands, the sound of the iron gate, the way my father avoided the walnut tree. All the pieces fit together now, though the picture they painted was darker than anything I could have imagined. And still, I could not look away. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and press the like button. Your presence here keeps me from feeling entirely alone with what I'm about to share. I stayed at that table until night fell, until the shapes of the bones blurred into shadows that stretched across the wooden surface. The only light came from the small lamp in the corner, its glow weak, flickering, as though it too was afraid to reveal too much. I traced the outline of the skull with trembling fingers, feeling its fragile ridges, the soft dip where the fontanelle had once been. A baby, I thought, no more than months old. Not a child who had walked or spoken, but one who had barely opened their eyes to the world. Something inside me cracked then. A sound rose from my chest. Not quite a sob, not quite a scream. Something raw, broken, animal. It filled the empty kitchen, bounced off the tiled walls, until I pressed my hand over my mouth to silence myself. I did not want the neighbors to hear. Shame mine, though I had done nothing spread through me like fire. I asked myself, who would bury a baby in secret? My mother, with her nervous glances, her voice edged with fear? My father, with his fists and silence, the man who never let a single mistake go unpunished, or both of them together, bound by a crime that rooted itself beneath the walnut tree like a parasite? The clock ticked louder. The air felt heavy with their presence, though they were long gone. And I remembered, suddenly, a night when I was very young, perhaps 5, perhaps 6, when I had woken to the sound of muffled sobs. I had crept down the hallway, barefoot, the boards creaking beneath me, and peeked into my parents' room. My mother was on the floor, her head bowed against the edge of the bed, her body shaking. My father stood over her, his shadow long and hard against the wall, and he said only one thing, his voice low, dangerous. No one can ever know. I hadn't understood then. I thought perhaps he was speaking of money, or debts, or the kind of grown-up things that children aren't supposed to hear. But now, with the bones before me, the memory returned with brutal clarity. It was not money. It was not debt. It was something much smaller, much more fragile, and infinitely more damning. I rose from the table, unable to look at the remains any longer, and I went to the cupboard where my mother had once kept her journals. She wrote in them when she thought no one was watching, late at night, by the dim light of the kitchen lamp. She never spoke of what she wrote, and my father forbade me from touching them. Most had been burned after her death. My father had thrown them into the fire one bitter winter evening, pages curling into ash while I watched in silence. But one, I remembered, had been hidden. I found it behind the loose board under the sink, where I had seen her tuck it away years ago. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed, but it was still intact. My hands shook as I opened it, searching not for comfort but for confession. The words were shaky, her handwriting uneven, but they bled with fear. I cannot sleep. The crying haunts me. I hear it even when there is none. I see his eyes in my dreams. He told me we had no choice. He told me it was better this way. God forgive me. I wanted to hold her longer, but my arms were weak, and he took her from me. The ground was so cold that night. I still feel the cold in my bones. I stopped reading, bile rising in my throat. The lamp flickered again, and for a moment I thought I could hear the faint echo of a baby's cry, carried not by air but by memory. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor, clutching the journal to my chest. The truth was here, in her words, and yet it gave me no peace. It condemned her, it condemned him, and it condemned me by blood. I was the daughter of people who had buried their own child, my sibling, beneath the walnut tree. Don't forget to like this story if it holds you, because sometimes speaking the unspeakable feels like screaming into an empty room, and I need to know someone is listening. I sat there until dawn, the bones still on the table, the journal still pressed to my chest. When the first light seeped through the lace curtains, painting patterns across the floor, I rose and forced myself to look again. The baby's skull seemed smaller in the daylight, fragile to the point of vanishing, and yet it carried the weight of a mountain. I thought of my mother, carrying that secret until her death, her body worn thin by guilt. I thought of my father, carrying it too, but in silence, his anger a shield against his own remorse. And I thought of myself, a child running through the garden, laughing, never knowing that just a few steps away, beneath the soil, lay a sister I never met. The house no longer felt like mine. The air was thick with ghosts, the walls with whispers. I wanted to run, to leave it all behind, but the truth followed me like a shadow. Wherever I went, I would carry the weight of those bones. So I stayed. I stayed and began to remember, piece by piece, the things I had once buried in my own mind. Nights when my mother held me too tightly, as though afraid I might vanish like the first. Days when my father's anger burned hotter than usual, when he would not let me out of his sight, as though watching for signs of weakness. The way they fought over me, over how I should eat, how I should dress, how I should behave, as though perfection could erase the stain of what they had done. I realized then that my whole life had been shaped by that secret grave. I was not just a daughter. I was a replacement, a second chance. And every smile, every punishment, every silence had carried the weight of the one who came before me. The journal lay open on the floor, its pages whispering as the breeze from the window turned them. I read on, though each word carved deeper into me. I see her in my dreams. I hear her when the wind moves the branches. He says we must never speak of it, but silence does not erase. Silence only feeds the roots. One day she will know. One day she will find out, and when she does, may she forgive me, though I cannot forgive myself. The letters blurred through my tears. She had written directly to me, though I don't think she ever meant for me to read it. And I could not forgive her, not yet. Perhaps not ever. Don't forget. Leave a comment. Tell me if you're still with me. These words feel heavier with each breath I take. That night, I returned to the garden. The moonlight lay silver across the soil, and the walnut tree loomed taller than I remembered. I carried the box, now carefully closed again, and I placed it back where I had found it. But I did not cover it with earth. I left it there, exposed, a wound laid bare to the night. The wind moved through the branches, and for a moment I thought I heard a child's laugh, soft, fleeting, like the sound of a memory I never had. My heart ached, and I whispered into the dark, "I know you're there. I'm sorry I wasn't sooner." The earth did not answer, but I felt lighter for having spoken. Yet the story did not end there. Finding the bones was only the beginning. What came after? The way the truth seeped into my veins, the way it reshaped me, was darker still. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and press the like button. Your small gestures help carry me through the weight of these memories I can hardly bear alone. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the window in my old room, the one with faded wallpaper of roses and small cracks spreading across the plaster, and I stared at the garden. The moonlight shifted, clouds passing over it, casting the walnut tree into shadow and light, as though the earth itself couldn't decide whether to reveal its secret or to hide it again. My hands still smelled of soil. No matter how much I scrubbed, the scent clung to my skin as though it had seeped into me. I kept asking myself if perhaps I had imagined it all, if exhaustion and grief had conspired to trick my eyes. But the box was there, heavy with proof, and my mother's journal lay open on the floor like an open wound. There was no room for imagination. The truth was too solid, too sharp. When dawn came, I made myself walk into the village. I passed neighbors who nodded politely, their eyes skimming over me, as though I were nothing more than an aging woman returning to her childhood home. None of them knew. None of them guessed. And yet, I looked at them differently now, wondering, did anyone suspect all those years ago? Did anyone notice my mother's pale face, her trembling hands, her sudden absence from the church for weeks? Did anyone hear a baby cry when it should not have? I walked into the churchyard, where my parents' graves lay side by side. The headstones were simple, carved with names and dates, no more. I stood before them and waited for anger to rise, but it didn't. Only a deep, hollow ache. I wanted to shout at them, to demand answers, but the silence of the graves was absolute. Only the wind stirred the grass around them, whispering secrets I could not catch. I whispered instead, "Why? Why did you do it?" My voice cracked. Was it shame? Was it fear? Was it him forcing you? Or was it you, too weak to fight? My words fell into the earth, swallowed by it, as though the soil knew more than I ever would. I left with no answers. When I returned home, I sat once more in the kitchen and opened the journal again. The entries grew darker as the pages went on. "She looks like her?" my mother wrote when speaking of me. The same eyes, the same small hands. Sometimes I cannot look at her without feeling the cold earth on my skin again. I pray for forgiveness, but the prayers fall like stones. It struck me then that I had lived my life in the shadow of a ghost. Every time my mother looked at me, she saw the child she had lost. Whether by choice or by force, I still didn't know. And my father, in his rage, saw not me, but a reminder of what he had buried. No wonder love in our house had been twisted. No wonder tenderness was always edged with fear. Don't forget to like this story if it still grips you, because I need the strength to go on telling it, piece by painful piece. I thought of leaving the house for good, of selling it, burning it, tearing it down so that the garden would no longer stand as a monument to their crime. But something kept me there. Perhaps it was guilt, or perhaps it was the hope that if I stayed long enough, I might uncover more. The truth, after all, was rarely just one thing. It was layered, like soil, each stratum hiding something beneath it. And so I began to dig not in the ground, but in the past. I asked the oldest neighbors what they remembered of my family. Most shrugged, said little, but one old woman, her back bent with years, told me something that chilled me. "Your mother," she said, her voice low, "she was gone for a time, wasn't she? After you were born. She told us she was sick, but I always wondered. She looked hollow when she returned, like she'd buried herself in the earth and climbed back out." The words rattled inside me. I wanted to ask more, but the woman shook her head, unwilling to say another word. Fear lingered in her eyes, even after all those years. That night, I dreamt of the walnut tree. I dreamt of roots that grew like veins, twisting through the soil, wrapping themselves around the bones of the child. I dreamt the tree whispered to me, its branches bending low, its voice deep and mournful. "You were never meant to know." I woke with the taste of dirt in my mouth. The next morning, I could not resist. I returned to the patch of earth, the box still resting where I had left it. I stared at it for a long time, then began to dig deeper. I told myself I was searching for answers, but perhaps I was only punishing myself. My fingers struck stone, then root, then something softer cloth again. I pulled it free, shaking with dread, and when the soil fell away, I saw another bundle, smaller this time, fragile. My stomach dropped. It was not one child. It was two. I fell back onto the grass, the world spinning. The second bundle was barely more than tatters, the bones within so delicate they seemed like they might crumble in the air. Twins? Or another child, buried later? My mind reeled. I wanted to believe it was impossible, that I was mistaken, but the truth was laid bare in my hands. I thought of my mother's face again, her distant eyes, the way she sometimes held me too tightly, and other times could not bear to touch me at all. I thought of my father's rage, his endless need to control, to silence. I thought of the nights I lay awake as a child, listening to muffled sobs through the walls. The past was no longer just a wound. It was a graveyard. Don't forget to comment if you're still with me, because I am not sure I can carry this alone. I buried both bundles again that night, but not deep, not hidden. I placed them side by side beneath the walnut tree, covered them gently with soil, and marked the spot with 2 stones. Not headstones, just stones, smooth and round, the kind a child might choose from a river. I whispered to them, "You are seen. You are not forgotten." The air grew still, and for the first time since I had unearthed the truth, I felt something like peace. But it was fragile, fleeting, like morning mist that vanishes with the sun. Because peace is not the same as forgiveness, and forgiveness would not come. What lingered instead were the questions that would never leave me. Why had they done it? And what did that make of me, the child they let live? Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and press the like button. It helps me feel less like I am whispering into an empty room, less like these words will vanish into the silence the way so much else already has. In the days that followed, I moved through the house as though it were a stranger's. Each room seemed heavier now, layered not just with dust, but with memory. The floorboards groaned beneath me in the same familiar places, but the sound felt different, like echoes of steps that had walked here before me, steps that had carried unbearable burdens. I could not escape the thought that the walls themselves had witnessed it all. My mother's cries, my father's commands, the silence that followed. I found myself tracing the cracks in the plaster with my fingertips, imagining them as scars, the house itself wounded by what had been done. The smell of the old wood stove, once comforting, now filled me with nausea. Every scent, every sound, every shadow felt tainted. Still, I stayed. Something rooted me there, as though I were tethered by the very soil beneath the walnut tree. Each morning, I opened the curtains and looked out at the 2 stones I had placed side by side. They seemed small against the vastness of the garden, fragile markers of lives that had been erased before they had even begun. I whispered to them in the quiet hours, though I never knew what to say. Sometimes I promised them I would not let them be forgotten. Other times I simply said their names, though they had none. I gave them names in my heart, names that felt like light after so much darkness. But peace remained out of reach. Because with every sunrise came the gnawing questions. How could my parents who had raised me, who had fed me, who had sung to me on rare, tender nights, be capable of such cruelty? And why, when others were buried properly in the churchyard, when bells tolled and prayers were spoken, did these 2 have only the cold earth and a silence that stretched across decades? One evening, desperate, I returned to the journal. I read the words over and over until the ink blurred and the meaning tangled. There was one entry written in a hand so unsteady I almost could not decipher it. I tried to fight. God forgive me, I tried. But he said we would not survive the shame, that no one could ever know. I was too weak. I let him do it. The earth remembers. I feel it in the roots. They whisper to me at night. I read that line. I was too weak. Again and again. It burned inside me, not because it excused her, but because it revealed her. She had not been innocent, nor had she been entirely guilty. She had been trapped between fear and obedience, love and horror, and in the end, she had chosen silence. And my father. I could almost hear his voice in those lines, the iron in it, the finality. No one can ever know. He had chosen power, as he always had. Don't forget to like this if you're still with me, because telling this is like peeling my own skin away layer by layer, and I need to feel someone's eyes on me, steadying me. The weight of it all grew unbearable. I began to avoid the kitchen table, the place where I had first laid out the bones. I could not eat there, could not drink tea there, could not bear the memory of those tiny skulls resting on the wood scarred by my father's knife. I began to eat, standing by the window, or not at all. Food tasted like ash in my mouth. Nights became the hardest. Sleep brought dreams, and dreams brought cries, thin, piercing cries that woke me in the dark. Sometimes I heard them in the walls, sometimes in the garden, sometimes inside my own chest. I would rise, my heart hammering, and go to the window, expecting to see shadows moving beneath the walnut tree. But there was never anything, only the stones, still and silent. And yet, I began to sense that silence was not emptiness. It was presence. Heavy, suffocating, unspoken presence. One night I lit a candle and carried it outside. The air was cool, the ground damp beneath my feet. I knelt by the stones, the candle trembling in my hand, and I whispered, "I don't know who you were. I don't know why they denied you the light, but I see you now. I will not look away." The flame flickered, almost went out, but held. I left it burning there until morning, when only melted wax remained, pooled like blood against the earth. From then on, I lit a candle each night. It became a ritual, a small act of defiance against the silence. And yet, each time, I wondered if it was enough. What good is light to bones that never lived? What good are whispers to children who never drew breath beyond a single night? Don't forget. Leave a comment. Tell me you're still here with me. Because sometimes it feels as if I, too, am being buried by the weight of this truth. I began to wonder if I should speak it aloud to others, to tell the neighbors, the priest, anyone who would listen, to let the secret out of the soil at last. But each time I thought of it, fear stopped me cold. Not fear for myself. I had lived too long to care for my own reputation, but fear of what would follow. What if they looked at me differently, as though I carried the stain of my parents' crime? What if they doubted me, called me mad, said I had invented it all in loneliness? And worse, what if they believed me, and the story spread, and my siblings' small bones became nothing more than whispers and gossip over fences? No, I could not let them be reduced to that. So I kept the secret still, but no longer buried. I carried it openly within me, though it poisoned every thought. And as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice something else. My reflection in the mirror changed. It sounds foolish, perhaps, but I swear it's true. My eyes looked heavier, shadowed not only by age, but by something deeper. I began to see traces of my mother's face in my own, the same lines etched by sorrow, the same tremor at the corners of the mouth. Sometimes, when I leaned close to the glass, I thought I saw someone else entirely looking back at me, someone small, fragile, eyes wide and accusing. I started covering the mirrors with cloth, but covering them did not erase what they had shown me, and so I sat each day at the window instead, staring at the garden, waiting. For what, I did not know. Perhaps for forgiveness, perhaps for punishment, perhaps for nothing more than silence, which was already more than I could bear. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and press the like button. Your presence here is like a small lantern in this endless dark I keep walking through. The days became a blur, each one stitched to the next by the same threads of silence, candlelight, and soil. The walnut tree stood tall in the center of it all, casting its shadow across the garden as if it were guarding something still, as if it were not content with the 2 small stones I had placed, but demanded more remembrance, more acknowledgement, more truth. I often sat beneath it during the afternoons when the sun filtered through the leaves in fractured shards of light. The air smelled of damp wood and resin, of earth that never seemed to dry, no matter how long the summer stretched. I would sit there and press my palm into the ground, feeling the coolness seep into my skin. And I imagined that if I pressed hard enough, the memory of what had been buried might rise to meet me. Sometimes I spoke aloud, though my voice wavered. "Were you twins?" I asked the earth. "Were you both born breathing? Did my mother hold you, even for a moment? Or were you taken from her before she could even say your names?" I asked. And I asked, but the earth never answered. Only the rustle of the branches above, only the call of birds in the distance, only the slow, inevitable tick of time. But at night, I swore the earth shifted. I would lie awake, listening, and I would hear faint sounds, like a settling beneath the soil, like a sigh pressed against the roots. I told myself it was my imagination, but my heart knew otherwise. Secrets do not rest quietly. They move, they stir, they demand to be felt. Don't forget to like this story if you're still with me, because every word I speak feels like lifting another stone from my chest, and without you listening, I fear I might collapse beneath them. I began to lose track of time. Some days I forgot to eat. Others I wandered the village without knowing how I had arrived there. I saw faces I had known in childhood, lined now with age, stooped by labor, but none of them recognized the storm inside me. To them, I was just the old woman returned to her parents' house, living out her last years in solitude. If only they knew that solitude was the lightest burden I carried. One afternoon, I visited the church again. The priest was younger than me, barely old enough to grow a beard, his eyes still full of certainty. I wanted to ask him if sins buried in the earth still weighed upon the soul, if the dead carried them into eternity, or if the soil devoured them. But when I opened my mouth, no words came. I only stood there, staring at the crucifix above the altar, and thought of my mother's trembling handwriting. God forgive me. I wanted to hold her longer. The priest asked if I wished to confess. I shook my head. How could I confess what was not my sin? And yet how could I not, when it had been handed to me like an inheritance, shaping every moment of my life? I left without a word, the heavy scent of incense clinging to my clothes, suffocating me like the earth itself. At home, I opened the journal again, though I already knew the words by heart. I traced them with my fingers, feeling the grooves of the ink pressed into the page. And I thought of my mother, not only as the woman who had buried her child, but as the young girl she had once been. Had she dreamed of love, of family, of joy, or had her life always been marked by fear and silence? I wanted to hate her. Sometimes I did, but other times, when the night was long and loneliness pressed close, I felt only sorrow. She had carried the weight alone, with no one to help her, no one to absolve her. And now that weight was mine. Don't forget, leave a comment if you're still here. These words cut me open, and I need to know someone sees the wound, that it is not festering in the dark unseen. There came a morning when I awoke to the sound of the iron gate creaking, the sound that had haunted me since childhood. I rose and went to the window, but no one was there. The garden lay empty, the stones still in place, the walnut tree unmoving. And yet, the gate had opened. I knew the sound too well to mistake it. I went outside, my bare feet damp from the dew. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of soil and leaves. The gate stood closed, as though it had never moved. But I felt it. I felt that something had passed through. Something unseen. Something that belonged to the earth beneath the tree. I lit a candle again that night, but this time I did not set it by the stones. I carried it into the house and placed it on the table where the bones had once rested. The flame trembled, casting shadows across the walls. And I whispered to the emptiness, "If you are here, if you are wandering, come. I will listen. I will not turn away." The flame bent as if in answer. I cannot explain it. Perhaps it was only the draft from the old window. Perhaps it was only my tired mind. But I felt a presence then, soft and fragile, like a breath against my cheek. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I imagined small hands reaching for mine, hands that had never held anything but earth. When I opened my eyes, the candle still burned. The house was silent. But my heart knew that silence no longer meant absence. Don't forget to subscribe, like, or comment if you can, because speaking this aloud feels like walking through fire, and each time I pause, I fear I will never have the strength to continue. And yet, I must, because the truth was not finished with me. The bones, the journal, the whispers, they were only the beginning of what I would uncover. What followed was darker still, and it reached far beyond the garden, into the very heart of who I was, and who I had always been without knowing it. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and press the like button. Your small gesture is like a hand on my shoulder, steadying me as I walk deeper into these memories that would otherwise swallow me whole. I began to see signs everywhere. At first, I thought it was coincidence, tricks of an overworked mind, but slowly they multiplied until I could no longer dismiss them. The sound of the iron gate in the dead of night when no one was there. The way the clock in the hallway would stop at the same hour, 3:21. Its ticking silence until I touched it, as though time itself refused to move forward. The smell of damp earth in rooms where no soil had ever entered. It was as if the house had absorbed the secret, and now, with my parents gone, it was seeping out, one haunting drop at a time. I tried to carry on as though nothing had changed. I mended clothes, boiled tea, swept the floors as I always had, but my hands trembled. The broom slipped from my grip. The needle pierced my finger more than once. Every ordinary task became heavy with the knowledge of what lay beneath the walnut tree. It was like trying to live while holding my breath. Sometimes I thought of leaving, packing a bag, locking the door, never looking back. But even in those thoughts, I knew I couldn't. Wherever I went, the secret would follow. The earth might keep the bones, but the weight had been passed to me. To leave would be cowardice. To stay was torment. I chose torment, though it hollowed me from the inside out. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old clothes in the attic, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a small blanket, yellowed with age, its edges frayed. Embroidered in one corner, in faint, uneven stitches, was a single word, Anna. My hand shook as I held it. A name my mother must have sown, perhaps in secrecy, perhaps in hope. A name that had never been spoken aloud to me. I pressed the fabric to my face and breathed in the faint scent of dust and time. Tears came before I could stop them. Anna? She had a name. My sister? My twin, perhaps? Or the firstborn, before me? My chest ached with a grief so sharp it felt like a knife. For all those years I had run through the garden, laughed in the house, eaten at the table, and all the while Anna had lain in silence, denied the simplest dignity, her name. Don't forget to like this story if you're still here with me. Speaking her name aloud now feels like placing a candle in a long dark room, and I don't want to do it alone. The blanket unraveled something in me. I began to search the house obsessively, as though every corner might yield another clue. I tore through drawers, pulled up floorboards, opened trunks long forgotten. Some days I found nothing but dust. Other days I found scraps, a broken rattle, a small shoe with its leather cracked, a scrap of paper with writing too smudged to read. Each discovery was like a breath from the past, faint but undeniable. And then came the photograph, hidden between the pages of an old Bible, pressed flat and forgotten. It showed my mother, younger than I remembered her, holding a bundle in her arms. She was not smiling. Her eyes were wide, her mouth a thin line. Beside her stood my father, his hand heavy on her shoulder, his face hard, stern. The baby's face was barely visible, just the roundness of a cheek, the shadow of a closed eye. But I knew. I knew it was Anna. I stared at that photograph until my eyes blurred. I wanted to tear it apart, to burn it, to destroy the evidence of what had been denied. But I couldn't. Instead, I tucked it into the journal, between the pages where my mother's guilt bled across the paper. Let them stay together, I thought, the picture and the words, fragments of a truth too heavy to hold in silence. The nights grew longer after that. I stopped lighting candles, afraid that their flames might call forth more than I could bear. Instead, I sat in the dark, listening. The house creaked, the branches scraped the window, and sometimes, beneath it all, I thought I heard breathing. Not mine, not the wind, something else. Don't forget, leave a comment, tell me you're here. Because there are nights when I wonder if I'm speaking to anyone at all, or if I'm only unraveling into the dark by myself. The garden became my church. Each morning, I went to the walnut tree and laid fresh flowers on the stones. Sometimes wild flowers, plucked from the roadside. Sometimes roses, thorns pricking my skin as I carried them. I spoke prayers I barely remembered, words I had not used since childhood, asking for mercy for Anna, for the other child whose name I did not know, for my mother, for myself. One morning, as I placed daisies on the soil, I noticed something strange. The grass around the stones was greener than the rest of the garden, thicker, lusher, as if nourished by something deeper than rain. It unsettled me, though it should have comforted me, life growing from death. But instead of peace, it filled me with dread. The earth was not forgiving. It was feeding. That night, I dreamt of roots again, roots that wound themselves around my ankles, pulling me down into the soil, into the cold, where tiny bones pressed against mine. I woke screaming, my sheets damp with sweat, the taste of dirt on my tongue. And still, I stayed. Because what is home, if not the place where even your nightmares are rooted? Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to comment. Because every word I share feels like another shovelful of earth lifted away, and I need to know someone stands beside me as I dig deeper. For deeper I must go. The truth is not finished with me yet. It never is. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and press the like button. Your presence gives me the courage to keep peeling back these layers, no matter how raw they leave me. The photograph haunted me. I kept it hidden in the journal, but my mind returned to it constantly. My mother's face, so young, yet already lined with fear. My father's hand, pressing down on her shoulder like a weight she could not escape, and that small bundle, swaddled in cloth, silent. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, and each time I woke, I felt as though I had betrayed her by remembering. I began to walk the village roads more often, though I avoided speaking to anyone. The air outside felt cleaner than the air inside the house, where dust and memory pressed against me like a suffocating fog. The fields stretched wide, carrying the smell of cut grass and manure, the songs of birds and insects. Yet no matter how far I walked, the shadow of the walnut tree followed me. Once I passed a woman at the well, one of the old neighbors who had known my mother. She stopped me, peered into my face, and said, "You've her eyes, you know, the same sorrow in them." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I carried the words home like a curse. If sorrow was my inheritance, then I was living proof of what they had done. That night, I returned to the journal. I read one line over and over until the letters blurred. Silence does not erase. Silence only feeds the roots. It felt less like my mother's confession and more like a prophecy. And the roots had indeed grown deep. Don't forget to like this if you're still here. These words are like stepping barefoot over broken glass, but I keep walking because someone must hear the sound they make. I started to feel my parents' presence in the house again, not in the comforting way the dead sometimes linger, but in the oppressive way of secrets that refuse to stay buried. The hallway smelled faintly of my father's pipe tobacco, though the tin had been empty for years. The bedroom mirror sometimes seemed clouded with my mother's breath, though no one else had been near it. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table and heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate. My heart thudded. The house was empty. I told myself it was the wood settling, but deep down, I knew better. I didn't go to check. Some doors are better left closed. I turned instead to the earth again. The stones beneath the walnut tree became my anchor. I tended them daily, brushing away leaves, straightening the flowers I laid there. The neighbors must have wondered, but no one asked. Perhaps they guessed, or perhaps they simply respected the silence that clung to me like a second skin. One evening, as the sun sank low and the sky burned red, I knelt at the stones and whispered, "I will not let you be forgotten." My hands trembled as I traced circles in the soil. For a moment, I felt warmth faint, fleeting rise through the earth into my palms like a heartbeat. I pulled back, startled, but also comforted. It was the first time I felt that perhaps they heard me. Don't forget, leave a comment. Tell me you're with me still. Because each time I reach deeper, I fear I'll fall into the silence without anyone to catch me. The days blurred again, until one morning I woke to find the two stones moved. Not far, only a few inches, but enough. I hadn't touched them. No wind could have shifted them. They were heavier than that. For a moment, I thought I was losing my mind. But the earth beneath them looked freshly disturbed, as though something had shifted from within. I didn't know whether to feel terror or relief. Perhaps it was their way of reminding me that they were still there, that they belonged not to silence but to memory. From that day on, I spoke their names, Anna, and for the nameless one, I gave the name Mara. Anna and Mara. Each night I whispered them like prayers. Sometimes, in the half-sleep between waking and dreaming, I thought I heard faint voices, answer back high, soft, not quite words, but not the wind either. The house grew heavier with their presence, and yet I could not leave, not while they called to me, not while the truth pulsed beneath my feet like blood through veins. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to comment. Because if I fall silent now, the earth will close over me too, and someone must keep listening, someone must remember. And so I stayed, and I listened. For what came next was darker still, and the garden had not yet given up all of its secrets. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and press the like button. Your presence here is the only thing that keeps me steady while I walk through these memories that burn like salt in an open wound. The stones no longer felt like markers to me. They felt like doorways. Each time I touched them, I felt as though I was brushing against a threshold, something just beyond the thin veil of the soil. The grass there grew thick and stubborn, greener than anywhere else in the garden, as if the earth itself wanted to draw attention to that spot. I tended it carefully, though my hands shook, and I often caught myself whispering apologies without even realizing it. Anna, Mara. I said their names often, until the syllables no longer felt like inventions, but like truths that had always belonged to the house. The silence between those names was heavy, though too heavy. I began to wonder if there had been more. My mother's words haunted me. Silence only feeds the roots. Roots. Plural. The soil might have been hiding more than just two. It was a thought I wanted to banish, yet it gnawed at me, growing sharper with every night I spent in that house. The dreams returned, roots tangling around my limbs, pulling me downward, tiny hands clutching at me in the dark. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, the sheets twisted tight around me like restraints. The mirror by my bed was covered, but sometimes I thought I could hear a faint tapping from behind the cloth, like fingers drumming for attention. Don't forget to like this story if you're still here with me, because each sentence feels heavier than the last, and I need the strength of knowing someone is listening. The village was quiet about my family, but silence has its own way of revealing things if you look closely. One afternoon, at the market, I overheard two older women whispering. I didn't catch every word, but I heard enough. That house. Tragedy follows it. The poor mother. And the husband, strict as iron. No wonder. When they noticed me watching, they fell silent, their mouths pressed into thin lines. I walked away with my basket empty, my stomach twisting. I began to wonder if everyone had known, at least in fragments. If the cries of an infant in the night had carried through the thin walls of silence. If the weight my mother carried had been visible to all, though no one dared to name it. Perhaps the whole village had colluded in its own way, choosing to look away, choosing to let the soil do its work. Back at home, I opened the photograph again. My mother's face blurred through my tears. Her expression was not just fear, it was resignation. A woman already defeated. My father's hand was not comfort, it was possession. I pressed my thumb against his face until the paper nearly tore. All my life, I had wondered why tenderness was so scarce in our home, why love always came edged with control. Now I understood, because love had already been poisoned at its root. That night, I lit a candle and sat before the stones. The flame bent in the wind, and the shadows of the branches stretched long across the ground. I whispered to them, "If there are more, tell me. If I must bear all of you, I will. But I cannot live with half-truths." My voice cracked, but I did not stop. I will not look away. Not like they did. I promise you that. The earth gave no answer, only the rustle of leaves. But when I returned to the house, I felt a shift, as though something inside me had been acknowledged. Don't forget to comment if you're still listening. Your words are the only proof that I am not speaking into emptiness. I kept dreaming of the attic after that night. The blanket with Anna's name, the boxes of old clothes, the dust that coated everything like ash. Something told me to go back, though fear pressed against my ribs. One morning, I climbed the narrow stairs, the wood groaning under my weight. The air up there was stifling, thick with the smell of mothballs and mildew. I searched again, slower this time, my hand steady. And then, beneath a trunk filled with linens, I found a small wooden chest. My fingers hesitated on the latch, my breath shallow. When I opened it, the smell of old fabric rose up, sharp and musty. Inside were baby clothes, tiny shirts, socks no larger than my thumb, a bonnet with lace fraying at the edges. Some were clean, untouched. Others bore faint stains, darkened with time. And beneath them, folded carefully, was another piece of paper. A letter, unfinished, the ink smudged. My mother's hand again. If someone finds this, forgive me. There were 3, not 1, not 2, 3. He said it was God's will. He said the world could not know. I held each of them, and each time I thought I would die. The earth holds them now. The earth keeps them, because I was too weak to fight him. The words blurred. 3, not 2, 3. I dropped the letter, my body shaking, the attic spinning around me. My knees buckled, and I clutched the chest as though it were the only thing keeping me upright. 3 lives, 3 silences, 3 secrets beneath the walnut tree. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to comment. Because I am unraveling as I speak these words, and I need to believe they will not fall unheard into the void. I stumbled down the stairs, the letter clenched in my fist. The air felt heavier than ever, the house pressing in on me from all sides. I went straight to the garden, to the stones. My hands clawed at the soil, frantic, desperate. I dug deeper, the dirt caking under my nails, the roots scratching my skin. And then I felt it. Another bundle, fragile, wrapped in decayed cloth, smaller even than the others. I pulled it free, my chest heaving, tears streaming down my face. 3. My mother's words had been true. My siblings, Anna, Mara, and now this third one, unnamed, unknown, a ghost I had never imagined. I sank to the ground, clutching the tiny remains to my chest, rocking as though I could soothe what had been lost decades ago. My sobs tore through the quiet evening, raw, unrestrained, a sound I had never made before. The air grew still, and for a moment I thought I felt the faintest warmth against my cheek, like a kiss carried by the wind. I whispered then, voice shaking, "You are not forgotten. None of you are forgotten." And for the first time, the silence seemed to soften. Don't forget, stay with me. Comment, like, subscribe. Because the deeper I go, the more I fear the truth will consume me whole. And yet, I know I must keep going. For them, for all 3. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and press the like button. These last words are the only gift I can give, and knowing you are there makes them easier to release. I buried them together that night. The 3 of them, side by side beneath the walnut tree, no longer hidden in scattered bundles of soil, but placed gently, carefully, as though at last I could give them what had been denied. I found 3 smooth stones in the river and placed them there, marking each one with my own trembling hands. Anna, Mara, and the smallest one, whose name I never knew. I whispered Clara because it meant light, and I wanted her to have what she had never seen. The garden was quiet as I worked, but not empty. I felt them there, not accusing me, not demanding anything, only present. The silence was softer now, like a blanket rather than a wound. I spoke aloud as I pressed the soil over them. You are seen. You are named. You are mine. The words felt like a prayer, though no priest would have recognized it. When I finished, I lit 3 candles, one for each, and left them to burn in the dark. Their flames flickered against the branches, casting shadows that looked almost like small hands reaching toward the sky. I stayed until the candles burned low, wax pooling into the soil, as though sealing the promise I had made. After that night, the house changed. It was still heavy with memory, but it no longer felt like a tomb. The clock in the hallway ticked again, steady, no longer pausing at that cursed hour. The mirrors remained covered, but when I dared to look, I no longer saw accusing eyes, only my own, tired and lined, but lighter somehow. I knew I could not undo what had been done. My parents carried their guilt to their graves, and nothing I did could erase that. But I had given the children what they had been denied: recognition, dignity, love. In my own broken way, I had made them part of the world again. Don't forget to like this story if you've stayed with me to the end. It matters more than I can say, because every word has been a piece of my soul torn open. Now, in the evenings, I sit by the window with a cup of tea and watch the walnut tree. The wind moves through its branches, and sometimes the leaves whisper, soft and low, like children laughing in the distance. I no longer fear the sound. I let it fill me, and for a moment, I am not alone. The past will always live in me, its pain, its silence, its secrets, but so will they. And when my time comes, when the earth calls me down into its roots, I know I will not be buried in silence. I will join them beneath the walnut tree, and together we will no longer be hidden. Don't forget, subscribe, comment, leave a small light behind for me. Because even at the end of my story, I want someone to remember that the truth, once spoken, never truly dies. It lingers. It breathes. It keeps us alive in the hearts of those who listen.